are back on Anderson Street. We were discussing education in America, which can be not a bland topic, but you never know. Like, are the people going to get really into it? What's the deal? Also, we had two people at the table that I have never met before, so getting into new terrain, tested it out, still lit, as you know. So we discussed everything from public, private, charter, parochial, homeschool, unschool, world school. And the people were hot. It was excellent. The vibe was delicious. And I think you guys will really find some intriguing points, to be honest. As you know, we never have any real answers to these issues. We want you to talk about them at your table. So you will, and let us know what happened there. Make sure to like, subscribe, follow YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, bop, 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 bop. Enjoy. Mary Pat and I went after I graduated Maryland and she graduated culinary school. We went on a month-long road trip together. First of all, amazing.
Oh, how cool.
And then we took like a left turn to Chicago and then straight down to Bible Belt. No Sims. So like maybe you could tell, like my mom's white, I'm brown. People are like, what? In the South? In the deep South?
That's awesome.
Yeah, I was dumb.
Right, so like,
That's amazing.
We paused, we had like a conversation and we were like, so if this happens, this happens, this, everything should be fine. But we went to Natchez, which at one point was, I think it housed like 30 of the top 40 millionaires in the United States. So they all lived here. It's right on the Mississippi River, so on. And we were staying in like the Gone with the Wind. So LOL, just like antebellum mansions, etc. Just so extra.
Wow.
And Miss Jeanette had gout and it was just like total story. So one night we're just sitting there and we're like, we should go across the train tracks. It just feels like a place that you would go across the train tracks.
Don't do it.
We did it, yo. In our rental. So
what's this movie?
Correct. Not telling Sim, like not giving him the daily call. We're just like, we out. So we were on one side of the train tracks, which has all the beautiful antebellum era tours, and everyone is, stately, and they still have the galas where you like walk through the town in your ball gowns. And then we went literally across the train tracks, and it was absolute dilapidation. It was just so very clearly generations of what at one time were, slave homes, and then the same families worked for the same families across the train tracks. Still, it was just like so very obvious, and pieces of ceilings and roofs were just folded in, and people lived in these places. And we drove past a school. And it was like 3 stories. I think it was a full block. And it was clearly like the person of color school, the lower socioeconomic school. It was the school that had been used for generations for these people. And over there was the lovely school. And this one had, windows were broken. Of course, there was, when you walk through the metal detector, front, outside, every entrance and exit.
Yeah.
Or I have police in it, yeah.
Yo, and we were there, we were there like during summer. We were out of school.
So we're talking a couple of years ago.
So this was a few years ago. Oh yeah, this was in 11 that we went, or even 12, I think. And I wasn't anticipating starting with this story, but here we are. And I guess the disparity, which it's a very American and or very Brooklyn conversation to have, like everything is racially related.
It is.
But like also it is, especially in education in America, in a very opposing way than in other cultures in the world.
You're right.
And I'm not as impassioned maybe, or maybe I don't know as much about education as everybody else at this table. So actually I want to sit here and learn from you guys. But I do pose the question of, can charter schools, can private schools provide some sort of equity for the kids that would live in the Natchez, Mississippis? I don't know.
Okay, here's what I feel. All right. Here's what I feel. I feel that basically it is totally about racism. It's totally about poverty in this country and racism. And if we can address those ills, then education will improve. It is a fallacy to say that public education is failing. Amen. It's a fallacy. It's that they're pulling funds away. These corporate reformers are pulling funds away from these schools. Thus, they have the standardized testing, which
Yes.
is horrendous.
Yes,
So do I think
true.
private schools can? No, I say put the money where it belongs in public education.
In school districts.
And school
in the
districts.
neighborhoods.
Yeah, let's get prenatal care for moms so the kids are born without defects. Let's get kindergarten. Let's get educators teaching educators, and let's get children not studying just reading, writing, and math,
Right.
but history and drama and science. Let's go for public.
I kind of agree and disagree. I think that charters can work because I'm not a product of charter schools, but I'm actually working in one right now. And so,
And where's that?
The one I'm working in right now is in Red Hook. So I think it's not necessarily about like the charter school label. It's about the people that's in the building. And so we have to be careful, one, about like who's in our building and who's teaching our children. But then also when it comes to charter schools, we also have to make note, and this is one of the points I was thinking of on the way here, is that if you look at any major charter school network, a lot of them backed by like big banks. So what's happening is that they're funneling all of this money, all of these. So basically all the politicians that have been lobbying against, providing more educational advocacy and, resources and equity, et cetera, all the fancy buzzwords. Now you take all the lobbyists that, are backed by these big banks. Then they say, oh man, education's a problem. We should fix it ourselves. And so they buy and build all these big schools. And so you have like the big networks. I'm not going to name any names. There's no shade, right? But I'm telling you, go on any one of them, they're backed by these big banks. And so it's like literally them taking the money that would go to public education and public schools and then funneling back out to charter schools, which are now privatized and they can run out their own rules and, govern themselves the way they want to, which is a good and bad thing, depending on which
And it seems like the
school.
teachers are worked to death, is what I've heard.
It depends, because it really all depends. The teachers are worked to death no matter where you go.
Okay.
If you're in public, if you're in charter, if you're in private,
Whatever.
you're always going to be worked to death if you're a teacher, and that's another conversation point. But I think like charter schools aren't the be all end all solution, but I don't think that they should be demonized as much as people think they are.
Okay.
Well, maybe can we clarify actually charter? I thought there's public charter. I thought it was like a public thing and there's a lottery and that means that only some kids can get in. So at some point, I don't actually know if that lottery is based off of like zoning or academic merit or...
All right, so I can't speak to all schools, but I can speak to one of the schools that I worked in. When we had a lottery, it's literally just by who wanted to be there. And so the system, how it works was that if we had one sibling already in the school, then if their brother or sister wanted to come in, they got an extra, lottery slot, right? So it wasn't by like, oh, we're looking at their grades. Now, I can't say this is the same for all networks, right?
Yeah.
But I know for mine, that wasn't the case. But I do know that there are that do, take academic merit and they don't say, oh, I don't want this person because they're special ed or they have a history of behavioral issues and we don't have the resources to support them. And so they, throw them into the, public schools, which more than likely, unfortunately, aren't equipped to handle or won't have the, won't give that child the necessary attention that they need. Sorry, I don't want to.
And
don't apologize.
I don't want to dominate the conversation.
Don't worry.
No, it's interesting because so we have an interesting problem in Philly. And I don't know how charters are set up everywhere. But in Philly at one point, they were handing them out like candy. So if you had an idea, they were like, here's a charter and $10 million. And you don't have to fulfill proof of concept for 3 to 5 years.
Wow. The city was providing funding to...
So the charter program is funded by the taxpayer.
Right.
So it's a public school, but the reason the charter matters is because it's, charting a new course, which is garbage from most of the schools. Mm-hmm. And so like, say we've got like 50 schools in the city, 50 charter schools in the city. I would easily say 25 of them fail in the first 3 to 5 years in Philly because it's a money-making scheme for a lot of them.
Right.
Then what ends up happening is the networks come in, get those charters, and now they're running 15, 20 schools in an area, banking $500 million in revenue from taxpayer dollars with very little oversight. So in Philly, we've had the charter system in place since the early 90s. I want to say within the last 2 or 3 years was the first time they stopped giving out charters to say, now we're going to revisit all the charters we've given out to see if they're successful. Wow. So there was no
like 20
oversight.
years later.
Right. And so you've got a ton of kids who are going through charter schools who, if they want to go to trade school or college or whatever, are having a hard time because they can't read and write. And so like that's so Philly, we're super corrupt. But anyway, like that
Everyone's across the board.
Yeah.
Really, there was no Common Core in charter schools? Oh, but like that's a farce.
There was a core curriculum,
Common
but it was different. So like my favorite charter school in Philly no longer exists, but it was the music production charter school.
That's my
You've heard of it, right? You heard of it?
Anything in the arts.
Right.
So
Yes.
it was great. It's like it's music production, but what ended up happening was the guys who did it weren't even educators. They barely had degrees. They didn't know how to manage money. And so they blew through $5 million in like 2 years.
Oh, wow.
And the school closed. And now the kids couldn't get diplomas. You can't get into a charter school in the neighborhood because the public schools are all closed.
Right.
And no charter came in to buy the land to open a school. And so you're in like an education desert in some parts of the city.
Right.
Which is
Correct.
wild.
Yes, and you know what's fallacious too? They're saying that charter. I'm sorry, I don't mean to denigrate your. You're there.
Guys,
It's
we're
great.
converting.
Look, I don't take it personally.
He didn't
No, we're all here.
I know the spectrum of how people feel about charter schools,
Yeah.
and I was the same way at one point. I was like, nah, the hell with it. And then I worked in one. I was like, oh, this is actually kind of cool, right? But again, I respect.
Yeah.
You
No,
know,
I'm
for it,
just
go
trying to
for
say
it.
they're saying that charter schools were like the be-all, end-all panacea.
Right.
But in fact, you're right. And where I'm from, it's publicly generated. It's all through taxes and stuff. And the problem was, well, the biggest problem, gang, I don't know if you all agree, is the core curriculum standard, that testing stuff. Is
Yeah.
horrendous.
Yes, I believe
because
that is horrendous.
let me give you an analogy of why it's really bad. Let's take law enforcement for a minute. So let's say somebody says, listen, crime has to be completely done within 20 years. And if it isn't done without, we're closing all the police stations down. So there will be no more law enforcement.
That'd be great.
That's what they're saying about school systems by putting this
Yeah.
core. All right, every school has to pass. And if it doesn't pass, we're going to close it down and fire all the teachers. Hello? Who teaches the
But then
kids?
you get no support to teach to the test or implement a strategy that's going to help you overcome that.
Yeah, but forget the testing.
I know that. That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
corrupt in and of itself
Exactly.
because they'll be like for example, they'll like test students or like help them learn like certain of the standards,
Right.
but then we don't know what standards are actually going to be on the test.
Correct.
So they could be studying something about reading the whole time, and then nonfiction, right? But
Right.
then the next thing you know, they get a test and it's all about poetry.
Right.
And so, you
Right.
failed, but you don't know what you're doing.
Right.
No, we didn't learn this because we don't have the time.
Exactly.
And, and we don't know who makes these tests. All
And
we
there's
know is
something- I knew it.
Pearson-
Private
I
company.
knew it.
we have like these big companies like Pearson and
right.
so all these people that
Yes,
Kaplan
Kaplan.
and Power School, all these people that make these tests, but there's no oversight.
That's
So,
Right.
right. You're absolutely right.
But here's the question for all of you. Why were charter schools invented? The money that's going into charter schools, that's why I do
Exactly.
have an issue with charter schools, because the money that's going into charter schools, why isn't it going into public education?
Correct. Already. Because those are the neighborhood schools already. Why don't we put it into...
Yes,
Yeah.
charter schools are taxpayer schools.
Yeah.
So why did you invent something that's exactly the same?
Because they thought it was the cure-all at the time, but actually, and I said it even in the interview, a bipartisan thing. Both Republicans
That's
and
right.
Democrats failed education.
Yeah.
Right, and
Because
continue
they-
to do so. And
yeah.
something we haven't even mentioned, which I think is really interesting, is you were taken out of public school as a absolute child,
Yes.
and were educated much differently than any of us in this entire room.
Yes. I was taken out
yeah.
in first grade. My parents are both school teachers. Mom was like a first and third grade teacher who then retired once she had me, and then had my two sisters and stayed at home and taught us.
And
But home was in Oklahoma. So I was in a college town, probably about 40 to 50,000 with students, so not super big, and a lot of like rural communities and things like that. There were people that were homeschooling at the time that were but a lot more of it was like religious based at that time, because I would have been starting to be homeschooled in probably the mid 90s. And where we were, most of it was religious based, where they didn't want their kids going and being exposed to things that were outside of their religious beliefs.
Harry Potter.
Yeah, exactly. You can't have Harry Potter in schools. And so, but my parents pulled me out because they felt that for a multitude of reasons, but the big ones were them being teachers themselves. I think they saw and being a part of the system, and they didn't want to take their kid and put them through the system that they knew was already having problems, and that the schools that were available to me were not quality schools. And some of them had crime problems, and some of them were just not very well-funded schools. And so they felt that putting me into that environment wasn't going to be something that they wanted to see me come back out of. And I think the other reason was that they thought, you go to school for, 7 to 8 hours a day, and they, would think, well, who's having the most influence on our kids when they're there 5 days a week? And they're there, the teachers see the kids more than my parents would have. Sure. And so they pulled me out, but also with a very clear view. I think at first grade, I was probably like, sweet, don't have to go to school, right. But they told us, they were like, because they homeschooled my sisters as well, and said, you can go back whenever you want to. Like, we can do this, we're gonna do this for, 1 year. And if any time during that year you're miserable or you wanna go see friends or this just isn't your thing, you have the option to go back. But it's interesting to listen to you talk, especially about the standardized testing and things, because I didn't test at all. I didn't test.
Lucky.
Right.
No standardized testing. Because I was homeschooled all the way up until 8th grade by my parents. And then in 8th grade, as we were starting to look into going into high school and those years, we looked at okay, if you want to continue going down this road and want to stay homeschooled, we're going to have to find something that gets you actual test scores, because trying to get into a college with no test scores is impossible. And so then I went into a private school that was a distance learning program for all of 8th grade through high school, so that I could actually graduate with a GPA and take the ACT and be accepted into a school without having to go.
Why they go that route? Why the distance learning route?
And so the distance learning route, I honestly don't know exactly how they picked this school. My diploma is actually from California, but I think they shopped around and tried to find schools that were very open to still keeping within the same system that we had, which was keeping me at home and then just having it more structured rather than me having to go physically to school. Because that was one of the big things. I feel that the opportunities that I had by being able to be homeschooled were that I would finish my math and my reading and whatever stuff my mom or dad set out for me and that kind of thing. But then I was given a lot of room to explore things like photography, which I ended up being in that career, and a lot of creativity and stuff. And there was just times that my parents just let us play. You finish your work, just go play.
Beautiful.
Right.
And it doesn't happen.
It doesn't happen. And
you probably
it's
got good lunch.
Yeah, I did.
But true.
Yeah, but
necessary when you're growing.
But detention was going to my room, so
Can I ask you one thing?
Sure.
I think that your parents were fabulous, and look at you. You turned out so amazingly well. What about the socialization aspect?
Right.
That's
a common misconception.
That's always the question.
Right.
So trust me, I went to some homeschool groups that we went and were okay, there is a socialization problem happening with some of the people that we interacted with, for sure. But on my end, I never really felt that way, because I went to a martial arts class. I was with kids for a couple hours a day, 3 days a week. I went to Boy Scouts.
Okay, so you were part of
other groups that were there and things like that. So I think the socialization thing is kind of overhyped. If it's gonna be a parent that is gonna keep their kids out of social things to start with, that's gonna be a problem whether they're in public school or not. Letting kids not go do activities outside of a schooling environment, I think, is just a problem in general. So my parents were very much aware of the stigmatism that comes with homeschooling and not being around a bunch of kids and stuff. But they encouraged us to go out and do activities. When there were local plays that would come to town, we would go try out for local plays and those kinds of things.
Wow.
So
Perfect.
That's ideal.
Yeah, it was really well set up. I mean, I still feel super lucky. Obviously, I'm biased because I came from that side of things and never went through the public side of things until I got to college. And that's probably a whole nother topic. But going to college was
university culture in America. Yikes.
But college was a huge slap in the face, because up to that point, I was basically handed the syllabus, a bunch of books, and been go. You're on your way. Do your pace. And so, I'd finish reading and literature and science, and I'd save math till last, and just hated doing that. But then I got to college and was forced to physically go to class, take notes, and then be going at this slow pace and listen to someone lecture about the thing that I was supposed to read in the book.
It wasn't how you learned.
And I was this is such a waste of my time, is all I felt. I was you could just hand me the book and give me the assignments and just let me do it. I don't need to listen to someone talk. So
I felt that way too, though. I went through public education and I loved it. But I did feel that way about college. I thought, just give me the books.
Yes.
I can do it. Yeah.
I just felt that at an earlier age. I just felt that because that was how I learned the whole way through.
Right.
I mean, it was I literally would I was always excited my like freshman, all the way through high school, to get my like syllabus and be able to like flip through and say like, what assignment am I gonna do in like week 18 or whatever? Be like, I wanna be able to get to that so that I would do all the other stuff ahead of time. And like my teachers would just let me work at my own pace, which also let me like work a part-time job going through high school as well, because I could do my school at night on my own. So
I just think it's mad fascinating that your parents were public school teachers where you lived and they were like, psych, not for you.
Yeah.
We're gonna do this. So that begs the question of how vital maybe in this, because like, let's be real, our education system is behind. And if we're comparing to like other Western nations.
They say that's fallacious too.
Really?
Yeah.
Who
I
are
was reading
they?
about the expert. She was the former secretary to the
like our
Secretary of
Education Secretary?
Education. She said, well, if you
Not
really
Betsy.
look at it, Denise
Not Betsy.
My girl Betsy.
I'm like, Betsy.
Because
She's
I
not
just
my girl.
think, well,
Let's clarify.
so let me clarify then.
oh God.
This is what I've read. I don't know this to be true, right?
Yeah.
But having traveled, what I see is that other countries are more into innovation and STEM, less creative. We are much more of a liberal arts society as well. That's
Less so though, I think nowadays. I wish we were more
Yeah.
creative.
I do wish we were more creative, but like, yeah, it's like liberal arts, but I think that kids are funneled into there and don't actually know what that means. Like, because you're not weaned or funneled in a way, like even the New York school system, at least, where you kind of could be like engineering or could be like drama, and you have these pathways that you get to because you showed some interest. That could be an interesting thing to add as a national kind of, not panacea, but thing. I guess I was curious really about school choice, because I can go on a tangent. I was curious about school choice, and like maybe if you're lucky enough to be growing up on the coastlines in a big cosmopolitan city, the likelihood of you being or having the closeness of better education or more well-rounded education, I don't know the particular jargon, might be better than if you're in the middle of the country where your parents may want to homeschool you. You know, like I lived for a summer in KCMO and everybody was homeschooled. It was the first time I came across homeschool people. Wow. And I found out that like all those states homeschool. Yeah. So it like made me think, oh my God, so no wonder like so many schools are just not even failing, they're just closing because no one's going to. So like, what about that? Could that be something that we institute?
Well, I graduated with an education degree and really didn't plan to use it. It was just kind of like fast track out of college kind of thing. Just wanted my degree. But like one of the things I learned during that system, I remember taking, I don't remember what education course it was, but they were talking about the requirements for like what your GPA had to be coming out of college to be a teacher. And it was like a 2.2 or 2.3 in Oklahoma. I'm sure it varies across the country, but it was like, that's like a C, C average.
Right,
C's
get degrees, baby.
And like D's in there as well. And like, I'm like, okay, so then these teachers are getting out and they're not showing that they performed very well in school. Some of them obviously could have, not all of them are coming out with a 2.2 or something.
Correct.
But like, that's the baseline that we're saying is acceptable to be able to teach other kids. But then at the same time, then those teachers are going into a system where they're getting paid something like $25,000 a year for a job that takes way more work than from just between the hours of when the kids are actually
just 40 hours.
in
You
school.
know, right at this table, we've all hit, or you guys have all hit upon the solutions I read about. And the solution, every one of you hit upon it. Like you're saying, teachers aren't being as well trained. So they're saying we need better trained teachers. The other thing is about school choice, you were saying?
Yeah.
Okay, so school choice.
It intrigues me.
Yeah, it does intrigue. But they were saying for a while, which was really cool, you hear about these magnet schools.
Right.
Like if you're artistically inclined.
Correct.
Yeah, and they thought that this was going to be the be all end all. It was going to be really fabulous. But then they said, how young do they start? How do you know what somebody's propensity is? So they were saying to save those magnet schools for high school. What do you think about that?
It's one of those, I don't know if you're from, but I know in New York, like that was one of those like, oh, this is a great idea. And then they implement it atrociously. And then when it fails, it's like, oh man, what are we going to do now? And then they come up with some grand idea, but then they don't follow through as well. I think that school choice, I don't know, because like it's a growing thing between like Montessori schools, that's another growing
Waldorf schools.
Yeah, Waldorf schools, homeschooling, that's another growing thing.
Unschooling.
I've even read about like world schooling where like parents will literally just take their kids and travel around the world.
Oh man.
I wish.
Right.
That's
I
it.
wish.
I came across these people on the road, yo. Wow.
So like, you know, there's so many different
What's
options.
unschooling?
Huh?
World
What's
schooling,
unschooling?
unschooling is when there is no real curriculum. You go out, you have playtime. The kid wants to go to Shakespeare in the Park. You go to Shakespeare in the Park. You like learn how to do things day to day. You go grocery shopping. You learn how to grocery shop. You learn how to cook for a group of 10. It's just like day to day.
It's like living in the
Can they read
1700s.
and write and do all stuff like that?
You're just roaming the streets.
All the options actually, I think,
But
get you
need
guys
money
hot.
for world schooling.
You do. Yeah, you need money for world schooling. Like,
Yeah.
you cannot be.
But I think
well,
there's-
unless you get grants, because that's the thing.
Really?
There's money
There's
out there.
grants
out there for that.
That's fabulous.
Oh my God.
There's
So
grants
many
out there
questions.
for
Can I go back
to questions?
everything, you know? So.
But I think there can be an argument to be made for unschooling. Like, I think the idea of taking someone and completely not educating them in some kind of formal way
Yeah, like formal way.
is probably not ideal for most people. But also, we were just talking prior to this starting about like, what happens if I have to like fix a tire or a toilet or sew something, like, or do my taxes? Like, nobody taught you how to do.
There's no
that.
financial literacy. There's no
No,
life.
there's none of that.
But there
You know?
used to be such courses.
Right.
They got rid of it. They don't even
The only
have-
thing I remember
Yeah.
from home ec is learning how to sew those little cushions. So like, you know, if I get a hole in
I
my
failed
jeans, I can
some.
do that.
But they don't
you know,
even
like,
have
I wish I
that.
had somebody that, you know,
Yeah.
taught me how
Oh,
to do
that's
taxes, how to like manage, you know, a budget, how to do my checkbook,
Very important.
how to, you know, fix a car tire. You know what I need to do, you know how to have a savings account, like all these different things that you
practical
need,
stuff.
they don't do, and like you know, it's unfortunate because then we run into a situation where now we have teachers that are working 3-4 jobs and still can't afford to make their
Driving
own rent.
Lyft.
You know, it was a time cover story last year. You know, I'm a teacher, I'm a bartender, and I work in like Walmart, and I can't afford my own
It was in
rent.
Oklahoma.
And now
I'll be a
I'm
victim.
on
It was
coming
you know,
It was
it's-
Oklahoma
it's
teacher because
yeah.
Oklahoma was
Yeah.
the state that had the lowest teacher pay in the country.
Right.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, we
Oklahoma,
are.
lowest
Wow.
teacher pay, yeah.
Yeah.
Private school pays starting at like
what's-
45.
And what's happening because of that is
Right.
that most of I have friends that graduated to be teachers. Do you think they stay in Oklahoma?
No.
Nobody
No.
wants to get paid
No.
that. So what happens is then you have a mass exodus
Right.
of
Total
education
brain drain.
of people who are actually good with, you know, they graduate to be good teachers and have the GPA to prove that they're good teachers, and they're so overqualified for the positions in Oklahoma to in terms of the pay that they go to Arkansas or they go to Texas or they even go to Kansas. They just go to bordering states.
Right.
And so then what's left is the teachers that kind of either barely making the cut or can't meet the requirements of these other states. So then it's just like this like there were school districts that were going down to 4-day school weeks because the money in Oklahoma was so mismanaged that it was supposed to be like all of this money was getting funneled into education, and then they got to the end of the year and they're like, oh, sorry, that money is just not available anymore. And so then all these school districts, like the only way they could afford was either to lay off teachers or say, hey, we're going to cut you down to 4 days school work weeks, you know. And it's like, then it's just like this rolling ball effect.
And so the question is still there. I have of places like this where look, we live in a capitalist society, we're consumeristic, we're materialistic. The thing is money makes the world go round. I'm sorry that is,
the reality.
you know, it's the reality of the situation. So would it be such a negative and deplorable thing to have charters and private schools put in a state like this where it's just abysmal in any other way?
But
Why
I think
can't we
that's
put that
part of the
money in
problem.
public
It's a money
education
machine
for
though.
that?
Like I was saying
Right.
before,
Right.
like, it's a money thing. It's not about like, oh, the quality of it. Nobody cares about and you know, I'm not saying nobody cares, but I'm talking about higher up.
They don't
Nobody takes that into account. Even if you know go on a governmental level. I've been in meetings where people arguing about, oh, this person's in a picture with the governor. This is what we're calling a meeting about? Like, who gives a fuck?
You're right.
Like, you know, if it's about recruiting teachers, why are we arguing about who's in this picture?
You're right.
You know,
Yeah.
so a lot of the times we have all these people with agendas and it's a big money scheme.
Right.
You know, it's to wash money between the banks. And so you look at a market like New York, it's oversaturated. Even in Jersey, it's oversaturated.
Correct.
Philly, oversaturated with
Right,
charters.
right.
There's no oversight. But then you go into a state like Oklahoma, where there's almost a desert because property. We also have to take that into account.
Yeah.
We also have to take like incarceration rates.
Right.
Because we all know
Poverty.
the school of prison pipeline,
Yeah,
right?
you know it.
You know, like it's all these things that are funneling in, and it's like it's a money scheme. It's a way to, generate more free labor by not having teachers, because if your child is not educated, what are they going to do?
Work.
They're going to work. And if they're not going to work, they're going to go to the streets.
Yeah, but you know what the corporate reformers believe? They believe that if we help education, it'll rid poverty. But actually, the way they're gearing it, it doesn't work that way.
It doesn't.
It really doesn't work.
And the other thing, sorry.
No, I just wanted, because Vic was saying the charter schools and the why don't we just put the money? The issue is we know public schools work because they work in the wealthier neighborhoods.
Right.
So we know they work. So it is about the money. So that's
and they're not giving equal amounts.
Right, which is
But
fine.
the money that's coming into
work in the wealthy neighborhoods.
More
because
money
the parents are putting the money
That's
in.
right.
It's not the government's not doing
Nope.
it. Like there's PTAs that have slush funds of like millions of dollars because like on the Upper West Side where they're having this big discussion right now about desegregating the districts, right?
Right.
Where it's like, oh, we don't want these brown kids going into this school, which are across the street, because now that they have these wealthy neighborhoods and they want to keep it that way, which in all fairness is understandable, right? But then we have to, the other thing that I was trying to make is that it's not only a money scheme for like the corporate banks, but it's also for the colleges. Because now charter schools, if you notice, any charter school you go to, they're always college.
Yes,
no
that
trade
is charter
schools,
schools. No.
Which is
no
terrible.
Which is terrible because now there's a drought of like every trade you could possibly think of. And then when you think about that drought, now they're charging people like 4 or 6 times, like 8 times the amount of what you would normally, pay, because who's going to do your work for you? Because nobody's going to these schools. Yeah. So now you look, there's, it's been, covered in news stories now where they're talking about how there's now a big push for like people to go back to trade schools because they're being filled out. And people are going to college, but they're not finishing. And if they are finishing, they're finishing with a lot of debt, which is then causing poverty, which is then causing crime, and then so on and so forth.
Here's the whole major thing, though. They're saying that we need equality in education. Unfortunately, the biggest funds go to the wealthiest areas, right? Mm-hmm. But they're saying who needs it the most are the poorer children because they don't have the advantages of their parents. Why aren't you funneling it into that? And also, encourage those children that might be mechanically inclined. Right. That might be, I remember one time they said one little boy that I had was mentally slow. Mm-hmm. This is how they phrased it. Mm-hmm. Mentally slow. I'm stuck at a light one time watching this little boy, just happened to be stuck in traffic, watching this little boy who was 5 take apart a bike and put it back together again. Right. The kid was a genius mechanically. Yeah. So, so like, why aren't we nurturing these?
Well, and I think
we don't nurture. I'm sorry. No.
I was just gonna say. I think growing up, even for me, there was a stereotype that vocational schools was like
a cop-out.
It was. That was the thing.
You're not smart enough for college.
Right. That was a stereotype that reigns true. But it is now where we're finding that people are going to school, and like you said, they're not finishing, or if they are finishing, they're in tremendous debt, and then ironically do end up back in some of those trades, just not well trained enough to actually move up anywhere or try to be able to make enough money to survive.
Good point.
Like if they had gone almost through a vocational school in the beginning, maybe getting enough skills to actually be skilled and maybe own their own company or anything in that regard, but like, instead, we look at, or at least where I grew up, that was just the stereotype. It was like the kids that went to vocational school were like, all right, these kids are problem kids. Like, they're not going to make it in college. Let's put them in here and maybe they'll be able to get a job that they can actually survive someday.
All you're doing is saying a college degree is needed for a low-level job, whether it's in business or anything else. And so now that lie is being pushed 70 years later. Yeah. And what we have is a system that is oversaturated with schools. And I think rural communities are probably better positioned by and large in the country than cities because there's less people. They just need to organize.
What about the idea of online education?
I'm all about it.
Okay, so like, just hear me out for a moment.
Going back to the equity thing, it's like now we have to figure out where do we put the resources to get the infrastructure for the thing, because if it's not called a school, it's still a place of learning that requires the support of tax dollars that people don't want to give to education because they want more money in their paycheck.